son remained calm as the judge read the sentence, death by execution.
Josue Flores was murdered last Tuesday on his way home from school.
I had a nightmare the other night. It was so real. You just like to work with them. I told him that's crazy.
Officers tell us Trujillo stabbed her boyfriend with stiletto heel shoes.
The officer has been shot. We need a lifeline immediately. I have the suspect in custody.
Police say the suspect may be responsible for the murders of at least 6 women whose bodies have been found in or near the Acres Homes area.
Defense attorneys had argued that Yates was legally insane and grossly psychotic when she drowned the children. One by one, they described the deaths of the alleged other 8 victims of the convicted rail car killer.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 5th episode of The Evidence Room. Today, we're talking about cop killer Carl Wayne Bunchen. Bunchen was executed in April of this year. He was executed for the murder of Houston police officer James Irby in June of 1990. That case caused a real reckoning in our criminal justice system. I'm lucky enough today to be joined by Officer Irby's former partner, retired Houston police officer and retired U.S. Marshal for the Southern District, Mr. Gary Blankenship. Thank you for being here. And of course, Mr. Andy Kahn, victims' rights advocate with Crime Stoppers. Thank you both for being here.
You bet.
First of all, tell us about Officer Irby.
Well, Jim was a career police officer, consummate professional, someone who really exercised officer safety and tactics, and not someone that you would think would be killed in the line of duty. It was just a very tragic incident. It's a hot summer evening, and we jumped out there kind of late, and he made a very routine traffic stop, had a very cordial interaction with the driver of the vehicle, and Carl Wayne Bunchen was a passenger in that vehicle who had been released from prison to a halfway house that he had never reported to. And he came out of the car and shot Officer Irby, and then came around, shot him again on the ground, and then fled, shot at some other citizens that had witnessed the incident, and was captured a short time later. It was a very tragic afternoon.
So, Officer Irby was a motorcycle officer.
Correct.
My understanding from reading from it, he really ambushed Officer Irby.
Exactly. The only conversation that Officer Irby ever had with Bunchen was he had got the driver out of the vehicle, the violator, and was having a very cordial conversation with the individual, and Bunchen started out of the car. And he just told him, get back in the car. He had no business with the passenger of the car, and went back to his conversation with the violator, told the individual, who later testified to all this in court, that, hey, I'm going to write you a ticket and you guys can be on your way. And before he knew it, the guy came out over the top of the car with a gun and shot him, and then went around, shot him again on the ground.
After Officer Irby's murder, Bunchen ran off and he took some shots at passersby. We were listening to some of the scanner tracking. There seemed to be civilians that got on the police radio.
Bunchen stood over Officer Irby's body and shot. There was a gentleman who was a security guard, if I remember right, a Hispanic gentleman, and he just put his truck into gear and honestly tried to run over Bunchen, which caused Bunchen to flee. And then he jumped out and got on Officer Irby's radio and said an officer had been shot.
I'm a civilian. There was an officer who stopped somebody here at Lally and Airliner 45. You got an officer down. Have an officer down.
This security guard notified the dispatcher of what had happened, and that I had just left Jim maybe 15, 20 minutes earlier.
Oh. Where were you when this took?
Well, it was a rainy afternoon, and of course motorcycle officers, unless you get like a big accident on the freeways, we were at the dot shop at Woodridge and the Gulf Freeway, and about 5 o'clock, the sun came out, everything was beautiful, and everybody said, okay, let's hit the freeways. And we walked out, and Jim said, I think I'm going to go to the north side. And I said, well, I think I'm going to stay out here on the south side. And we were just going to do a little enforcement, write a few tickets, kind of justify our existence for the day, do a little work. And he pulled that car over, and another officer, one of the other motorcycle officers, got on the radio and he said, Jim, there's a guy headed out the North Freeway on a motorcycle without a helmet. And that was when the law required you to have a helmet on a motorcycle. And Jim got on the radio and he said, I've already got one pulled over. And And I often wonder if Bunchen may have seen him talking on the radio. Because all he said was, I've got one pulled over. And then the events portrayed. And I was there. As fast as I could get from Woodridge in the Gulf Freeway area to Airline and Larley Street, it was maybe 10, 15 minutes. And I remember as I pulled up, another one of the motorcycle officers ran up to me and he goes, Jimmy's shot and he shot bad.
Officer has been shot. We need a lifeline immediately.
And they had already loaded him, but I remember his helmet laying there full of blood on the street, and his motorcycle sitting there right behind the car, because Killingsworth, the driver of that vehicle, he stayed. He didn't want any part.
That's clear, sir. Do we have a description of the suspect?
But he was caught fairly quickly.
Correct. Just a few blocks down the street in a warehouse.
Was he hiding or trying to hide?
Well, when the officers closed in, some people pointed, and when the officers closed in, he dropped the gun and surrendered.
Okay, that's going to be the Pony Express behind Lowry Street.
It's going to be 26 Lowry at the Pony Express warehouse. Suspect in custody.
And Jim's motorcycle is actually in the police museum, right?
Right, at 1200 Travis. It's
That's his motorcycle?
I
did not know that.
I took that when his wife donated that motorcycle to the police museum. I'm the one that took it there.
I remember in the trial exhibit archive, his helmet's there. And I remember when we opened the box that had the files in the trial exhibit and there was his helmet. That was, it was a horrible feeling, because you just think he was just going to write a simple ticket.
Right.
That was it.
Just a ticket for, I think it was a license plate or an inspection sticker, or some very minor traffic infraction.
And it winds up in Officer Irby's murder.
And ends up in Officer Irby's murder, yes.
Now, Carl Wayne and Andy, you became intimately involved with Carl Wayne Bunchen. I think there was only a very brief moment in this guy's life that he wasn't committing a crime.
If you want to define career habitual criminal, Carl Wayne Bunchen is your poster child. I was with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Parole Division when all this went down, and I remember seeing the news, and I went and I pulled a file that we had back when you actually had files, and I started looking at this guy. That's just shaking my head. And then the first thing that stands out to me was he did 13 months of a 15-year sentence for sexual assault of a child.
13 months in prison
months in prison.
Of a 15-year prison
And he was paroled, so that's like a year and a month. And I knew that was what was happening with a lot of offenders at that time. No one in the public knew what was going on. It was kind of a hush-hush situation of a quota system that you had of releasing people from prison. It didn't matter how many times they've been convicted. It didn't matter the offense. If they were eligible for parole, they were coming out. So I look at Bunchen. First thing, besides the obvious, doing 13 months out of 15 was insane to begin with, especially on someone who's got...
On a child rape.
On a child rapist who's got at least 7 prior convictions. That's just convictions. Plus he had convictions in other states as well. So he's sent to a halfway house and he doesn't show up. But nobody does anything. So for 30 plus days, he was a fugitive.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but was he
Not
really
by
a fugitive?
no.
By definition he was, but he wasn't. And let's back up a little bit. So he gets out of prison when he's paroled. He's not supposed to go to his own house. He's supposed to go to this, what they call the parole halfway house. Right. He doesn't show
Right.
up there. What should have happened when he didn't show up?
A blue warrant should
There
have been
should have
issued.
been, right, there should have been a violation report issued, and they would have issued a blue warrant. That's kind of standard operating procedure. I mean, I can see maybe a few days, wait, but this was 30 some odd days and still nothing. So when Jim Irby pulls the vehicle over with Bunchin in it, Bunchin, and rightfully so, thinks he's a wanted fugitive. He thinks there's a warrant out for his arrest. There should have been.
So he panicked.
You're right, exactly. And that was so frustrating to me and so many others that were in the system, because we knew this was not an anomaly. It was par for the course. And then when everything exploded after this happened, and we started doing a deeper dive into Bunchin and finding out what should have happened that didn't happen and what could have been done to prevent this.
I mean, this officer, he was a father of two.
2 babies, 2 very young children.
So 2 children grew up without a dad
Sure.
because a guy panicked because he thought he was wanted when he really wasn't.
Right.
But he should have been.
And the day after the murder, the blue warrant dropped. Imagine that.
Well, I'm assuming that's
sure.
a little bit of CYA. at
Well,
that
I'm
point.
sure.
And I've got to imagine as police officers too, that blue family had to have just been absolutely livid when you find out, okay, first of all, no warrant was issued for this guy when it should have been. And 2, he did 13 months of a 15-year prison sentence. I'm sure at that point, the entire city had to have started asking, what is going on with our criminal justice system?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that was happening at that time, the federal courts were getting involved with TDCJ and the things that were going on in the prisons, and they had put some mandates on the prison system, and our state legislature was so worried about having to build prisons and prison overcrowding, and it became a quota system, if you will, as Andy referred to it, that we have to kick so many out. And the victims are the ones that pay that bill.
There was actual documentation that they actually put in a inter-office memorandum that I had obtained that showed specifically how many offenders had to be released weekly and monthly when they were eligible for parole.
It didn't matter what crime.
Didn't matter what if you were eligible, you were coming out. You had an over 80% approval rating in 1990.
For parole.
Right. The way I phrased it, you basically had to be a repeat axe murderer to be denied. If you were eligible, you were coming out. And Bunchin was a classic example, of a violent offender who should never ever have been released if not for the quota system.
And so Officer Irby's murder pretty much dragged that into the light of day, into the public eye.
Oh, certainly. Certainly it did.
2 memorial funds were established for the family soon after his death. His widow was here to say thank you, but she had harsh words for the judicial system that put his killer, an ex-convict, back on the streets.
I was always prepared for him to get hurt on his motorcycle. I wasn't prepared for him to be shot down in cold blood. I truly believe that this is proof that our judicial system has failed miserably, and this town is in grave danger.
Nobody knew about people coming out of prison that was serving 1 month for every year they were sentenced. It became a catalyst for change for victim advocacy. You saw a movement. And I remember I met with Jim's widow, Mara, and Mara at that time after a few months, had started what was called the Irby Foundation. And the Irby Foundation's primary goal at that time was to raise awareness of the prison overcrowding and a request that prisons being built.
The Irby Foundation is actually going to be a nonprofit organization aimed at reforming the prison parole system, encouraging expansion of the retention system, and hopefully coming up with some legislation to encourage mandatory sentencing.
Mrs. Irby, I know this is a difficult thing for you to do at this time. You have 2 small children, a full-time job, you're dealing with your grief. How are you finding the strength to push for this very activist role?
Excuse me. It's a lot easier than sitting home feeling sorry for myself and my kids.
It wasn't just the prison overcrowding in building more prisons. It eventually led to, I believe, a change in the mandatory sentencing laws.
Back then, the parole eligibility was 1/4 of your sentence, but you were also able to accumulate good time. Bunchen was racking up good time credits that were put forward towards his parole eligibility. That's how he became eligible for parole in only 13 months of a 15-year sentence. The combination of flat time plus good time equals your sentence parole eligibility. That's no longer the case.
I was going to say, did this lead to the end of that?
That was one of the catalysts for changing that, where you have to do, on a case that's considered to be a violent offense, which sexual assault of a child is a violent offense. You can't get any more violent than that other than murder. You now have to do half of your sentence. No good time goes towards that sentence.
Now, one of the other reasons I believe Bunchen became notorious, and correct me if I'm wrong, is because he was the oldest death row inmate that the state of Texas ever put to death. And let's talk a little bit about why he was on death row for so long. I mean, Officer Irby was murdered in 1990, and Bunchen wasn't executed until April of this year, 2022. It was never really a guilt or innocence thing, was it? I mean, was there a problem with that part of the trial?
The judge that presided over the trial was moved to Fredericksburg, Texas. There was so much publicity here, so they moved the trial to Fredericksburg. The judge had made some comments during the trial. He kind of likened himself to Judge Roy Bean, the old historic law west of the Pecos, and who was notorious for making comments like, "We're going to give you a fair trial before we hang you." And the judge made some comments during the trial, not in the presence of the jury, that kind of were along those lines. "We're going to give you a fair trial before we execute you," and Bunchen actually filed an appeal on that.
Judge basically had a presumption of guilt, and that judge shouldn't be saying anything.
And the judge should.
Right.
I mean, there were inappropriate comments. The judge didn't say them in front of the jury, but when
it was enough.
But when an appeal happens, it goes back to the trial court for the judge to answer, and this thing sat in that trial court because there were no time constraints on that judge to answer that. Well, I'm sure he was embarrassed by it, and he sat on that thing for a long, long time. It just sat on his desk, and then once we got through I think the federal court ruled that although they were concerned and the comments were not appropriate, but the judge did not make any of those comments in front of the jury.
Okay, so that essentially, the guilt or innocence phase was okay. Now, it's my understanding that Bunchen wasn't trying to claim he didn't do it, I'm not guilty. He claimed self-defense, which kind of stunned me.
Fast forward, there was this Penry case came down that this case went to the Supreme Court where a person said, "I didn't get to tell the jury in the sentencing phase about all the bad things that happened to me when I was growing up." So all these people in prison filed these appeals under this Penry ruling, Bunchen included. So we had to go back, 19 years later?
Yep.
After this conviction, and completely retry the punishment phase of this trial, which was honestly almost like a whole new trial. And we could not tell the jury, because Texas did not have life without parole at the time he was sentenced, and he had to be sentenced under the guidelines back in the 90s when he was sentenced. So we couldn't tell the jury that if they gave him life, he would automatically be released. Because
he would have served enough time to have been eligible for parole. Not necessarily immediately released, but eligible to be released.
You would have been right back in the parole
He would
process.
have served a life sentence already.
So the guilt or innocence part of the trial, that was secure. It was the punishment phase of the trial, saying the jury didn't get to hear about this awful childhood.
For the second trial.
Were you there for the punishment phase?
Yes.
How did that go?
It was, honestly, it was like going through a whole trial again. All the same witnesses, the ones that were still alive, everything we went through. And luckily, Lance Long was one of the prosecutors. He was a very good prosecutor with the DA's office, and we were able to get a conviction or a death penalty sentence again.
Jury came back and put him right back on death row.
Put him back.
But you don't, but everything then starts from that time on. So even though you're basically back on death row, your appellate process, you're going through the appeal process like you're brand new person on death row.
So it all okay. So
Everything
the clock starts
starts
So essentially,
again.
this man was sentenced to death twice.
Twice.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. So that explains how he was on death row for so long. Okay. All right. That must have been gut-wrenching for the family.
Oh, it was. And what was really bad was the kids were old enough. They were adults by this time. So, I mean, they were old enough to understand. And I mean, to sit through crime scene photos and autopsy photos and I mean things.
That all has to be presented
It
again.
all had to be presented. It was almost like a completely new trial. And it was horrible on Jim's widow and now the two children. I mean, when Jim got killed, the two children were infants. They weren't aware of all this or how this thing went down.
We knew that if the jury did not put him back on death row, that very next day he would have been parole eligible, and that would have probably destroyed the family even more.
Certainly.
When the punishment retrial came up, my colleague Phil Archer, veteran journalist, interviewed Bunchin on death row. When Archer interviewed him on death row, he tried to justify the shooting, claiming the officer pulled his gun first.
There was no doubt in my mind he was fixing to shoot me.
But at the end of the day, still felt it was justified.
But at the end of the day, I know it was justified.
There was absolutely no evidence ever presented that Irby was threatening his life. Irby was making a traffic stop.
Bunchin never tried to claim that he was innocent, that he didn't pull the trigger. His claim was that it was self-defense. I found that an odd claim in a cop killer trial. How do you try to claim self-defense in something like that?
Well, that's just, he's a career criminal. He was a liar. And I mean, there was a handful of eyewitnesses to this encounter. I mean,
he had nothing to lose, so you throw
Exactly.
everything out there and you hope something sticks.
He made that claim 2 weeks before he was executed, that it was self-defense. It was him or Irby. Irby just barely cleared leather with his weapon before he was shot.
I was going to say, did he even have time to get his?
He got his gun and dropped it right then. There was no, Irby never got his gun hardly out of the holster.
And I'm assuming he pulled it when
he saw
Bunchin
him
came
come
to
up with the gun.
How did you get the family through it that time? I mean, you've now got a widow with two very young children who are going to have to grow up without a father.
Yes, it was a challenge, and the city, because of Jim's involvement with the rodeo and young children that he worked with, the calf scramble kids, the city had an outpouring of support for the Irby family.
James Irby won't be here to take care of them any longer, so his friends and fellow officers, and indeed the whole community, has turned out to pitch in and help.
Keep your headlights blazing to let every officer that's on duty with his life on the line know that we're behind them 110%.
A local radio station is carrying the benefit live, and the public response has been exceptional. Most of the crowd is made up of Houstonians who never met James Irby, who only know he was a police officer killed in the line of duty. The benefit is for Officer Irby's family, and in its first hour, it raised $10,000.
And Jim and I had children about the same time, so my daughters and his son and daughter are close to the same age, so we stayed close with them. I mean, I spoke with Jim's son this morning on the phone. I mean, we still we talk very frequently, and we visit and babysit his grandchildren, and I always tell him I love him every time I say goodbye to him, because he never had a dad to tell him that. So you know, it's a tough thing, but we've stayed close with him all these years and tried to be there for the dad that he didn't have. And there's a group of the motorcycle officers. It's not just me, but there's a group of the motorcycle officers that worked with Jim that have really stayed close, especially with Jim's son.
And he went into law enforcement.
And he
for a
went
time.
into law enforcement. He was a police officer and a SWAT team member and a canine officer. He really excelled in a police career. And then Motorola just kept trying to hire him because he was a very bright young man. He had a big computer background. And so he's working with Motorola now, and he's helping design computer systems for law enforcement agencies.
Wow. When he was executed, one of the things he did say, he did say, I have remorse for what I did. But again, I think he tried to stick to that whole, I did what I had to do deal. How did that sit with the family?
I can't repeat on television some of the comments that Jim's son made after we walked out of there, but suffice it to say, I don't think they believed a word he said in his final statement, or rambling, as I call it, because you were there. He rambled on quite a bit, and I don't think any of it was truthful or sincere.
The family was very composed when they came out. In the days following, did that bring them a sense of peace finally?
I think so. I think it's just a little closure that it's over.
You hate to say, something, but something positive did happen as a result of Jim's death. It spurred on a movement. It put me to where I am, still doing what I'm doing 30 some odd years later. Laws have been changed. You can't get out like you did, Bunchen did. There's no more automatic releases. Victims can go witness executions if that's their decision to do. So a lot of changes on a positive level to enhance victims' rights and public safety all stemmed from this tragic murder of Jim Irby.
That does it for this episode of The Evidence Room. I'd like to thank Gary Blankenship and Andy Kahn for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Next week, we are back with our final episode of the season. It's going to involve ice pick killer Danny Bible. That's next Wednesday at 6:30, streaming on KPRC 2+.